climate and ecological crisis can, unfortunately, no longer be solved within today's systems. According to the current best available science, that's no longer an opinion, that's a fact. That's a fact. You cannot negotiate with physics. The longer we avoid this uncomfortable truth, the more precious time we will lose. And this is time we do not have. Time, we do not have.
The last 2 years have been remarkable for extreme weather around Australia. Penrith was the hottest place on Earth for one day. We saw the third mass bleaching event at the Great Barrier Reef. Everyone in Eastern Australia remembers the bushfires of 2019-2020. All of these are beyond the upper end of what we were expecting at a 1.1 degree temperature rise.
I'm here to remind you of the promises that you have made to your children and grandchildren. Because when it comes to facing the climate emergency, the world is still in a state of complete denial.
We were warned 10 years ago that if we wanted to meet the lower Paris target of 1.5, we had to start getting emissions down during this past decade. We didn't do that. That means that it's virtually impossible now to hold temperature rise to 1.5. Impossible.
The targets and commitments being presented and discussed today are very far from being enough. Our leaders can still get away with almost anything. No one is held accountable. No one is held accountable. It's like a game. Whoever is best at packaging and selling their message wins. Unless we treat the climate and ecological emergency like an emergency, no sufficient changes will be achieved.
So that brings the 2 degree target into question. Already, 2 degrees is going to be a pretty difficult climate to live in. But even that means that we cannot afford any more delay.
Today we hear nations and leaders all over the world speak of an existential climate emergency. And yet, instead of taking the immediate action you would in any emergency, they set up vague, hypothetical, distant targets way into the future. Targets based on loopholes and incomplete numbers. Targets like net zero emissions 2050. It's like waking up in the middle of the night, seeing your house on fire, and then deciding to wait 10, 20 or 30 years before you call the fire department, while labeling those trying to wake people up alarmists.
At the very minimum, we need to cut our emissions by 50% by 2030, and that means we need to get them headed down quite strongly by 2025. There is absolutely no room for the expansion of the fossil fuel industry. Absolutely. That's absolutely clear.
But you've now had more than 3 decades of blah blah blah. How many more do you need?
A 3 degree world is pretty frightening when you actually start looking at it in any detail. Extreme heat would be beyond anything we're experiencing now. A lot of what we call extreme heat, between 35 and 40, might be considered a cool day during a summer with a 3 degree temperature rise. The Great Barrier Reef would be gone. Forests would probably burn as soon as they grow back. We may become a food importer rather than exporter. It'll be really tough to grow the food that we need. When you think about it, this is a world where you can actually plausibly say a collapse scenario cannot be ruled out. This is going to be a really tough world just to live in, let alone to survive in.
We are desperate for hope. Desperate for hope. Hope comes from action, not just words. Preserving life on Earth as we know it is voluntary. The choice is yours to make. But I can assure you this. You cannot negotiate with physics. And your children and grandchildren will hold you accountable for the choices that you make. What we need is to implement implement annual binding carbon budgets based on the current best available science. How's that for a deal?